But actually, we've made it. We completed Final Fantasy 16 a few days ago, and I've had a couple of days to really sort of process exactly what this game was. This next big installment into the Final Fantasy franchise. And inevitably, there are two questions that come to me all the time about this. One, is it a good game? And the second one, is it a good Final Fantasy game? Which are two very, very separate questions, and I'm going to attempt to answer both here. This is going to be the final non-spoiler video. I want to look specifically at a couple of characters and the overall story in the next videos, but this will be your final non-spoiler one. Let's start with the obvious one. Is it a good game? Well, let's talk about the pros and cons of Final Fantasy 16. In the previous two videos, I talked to you about how the main story was clearly the defining focus of this game, and that is done exceptionally well, in my opinion. It is worth a purchase to get this. Is it worth purchasing a PS5? That will come down to you and your own financial situation, but this is a fantastic story to go along with. It's emotional. It didn't quite bring a tear to my eyes. If you've played Final Fantasy 14, I wouldn't say it was as good as, say, Shadowbringers, which is my favorite story in RPGs, but it is an exceptionally well-done story, and it's been carefully crafted to go along with it. I've seen plenty of feedback from people mocking sites like Kotaku and looking at Jesse Cox's video, saying, oh, this character should have been like this and this. I massively disagree. I saw things in these characters, and I'm sure those are clickbaity headlines, that were fantastic. And there wasn't a character I actually actively disliked in any way, shape, or form. Like, I was like, I hate this person. There was no character like Thancred in Earlier Realm Reborn where I was like, I just despise this character. Or Alphino, even, for that example, who took years to grow on me to reach the heights where I was like, this character is somebody I very much enjoy. Oh, fuck off, bro. We meet again. Such selflessness is a rare thing in this day and age. Go away. This is the appropriate face for this guy. This is the only time this facial animation is correct. Dude, I wouldn't date this guy if the world collapsed and he was the only guy on Tinder. Right? Swiping left. I think he's the embodiment of herpes. I usually pick and choose very quickly. I make a snap judgment. That did not happen in this game. Every single character that I dealt with was doing king shit. Absolutely king shit all the time. I want to give massive props, especially to the villain of the game, whose model design set the tone, and the speech and exactly what they were going for as character was far more clear than what I've experienced in many of the other Final Fantasy games. Now, I want to be absolutely clear on this. I'm new to the franchise. I'm very new. My first ever Final Fantasy game was Final Fantasy 14. And since then, we have played 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and this one. And Remake. I've played Remake, I played the DLC, and I've played Crisis Core. Those are what I've played, and over my next 12 months, I'm going to attempt to complete all of the main titles in there. But just so you know, that's my experience with the Final Fantasy franchise. And I say that because I do not have some nostalgia about getting Final Fantasy VII when I was a teenager, like when my first console, and playing that game for 7 or 8 months straight because it was my only game. I don't have that experience. I came into the franchise with totally fresh eyes, which might give you a different perspective on what I feel about Final Fantasy 16. The characters were wonderful. The setting was fantastic. It was beautiful. It was gorgeous. It had reasonable variation on where you were going in terms of the environments and the different sort of things that you encountered while you were there. Now, let's talk about some of the negatives, because there are a few. It's not a perfect game. And I think if you're a diehard fan of the franchise, you consider most things to be a perfect game because it's Final Fantasy and it's your beloved. You absolutely enjoy it. But again, I don't have that perspective. So it's not a perfect game. I think objectively, it's not a perfect game by any means. It has flaws. Firstly, the story is far too fucking miserable.
Bullshit. Bullshit. Derivative. That I love. I absolutely love.
It's grimdark. I get it. People are like, yeah, it's a grimdark story, and this will drag more people in. I'm not sure about that. It will vary from person to person, but the relentless onslaught of misery that is Final Fantasy XVI's main story kind of became comical by the end. And that's if you include all the side quest stories. Now, if you stick to the main story, there are some very, very brief moments of levity. Very, very brief before it once again plunges you into absolute darkness. Yet the side quest stories that go along with it are just relentlessly miserable. They're so grim and nasty, and it just piles on. And I don't think their intention was that by the time I got to the end of the game, which took us 50 hours maybe, this is on New Game, that I would just find it kind of comical. And I did. I ended up laughing. It's like a roller coaster. Yay! This is fucking ridiculous. It's like, okay, and this probably happens now. And no, what actually happens is even worse. And you're like, Jesus Christ, dude. And it got to the point where it did turn from being like, oh my God, into just like, sure, why not? That would happen as well, I suppose. And it's going to put a lot of people off, I think, at certain points. Unless you're really into very heavy darkness, this game does not let up whatsoever on plunging you into this nightmare-fueled scenario. And I'll be interested to see how people relate to that, considering how light areas that occur in other FF games. But we'll get to that shortly. Let's talk about the combat. Like, the combat was great. Overall, really, really enjoyed it. As a big fan of Metal Gear Rising, it's one of my favorite games. Totally connected with this game. Not played the Devil May Cry series yet, so we're probably going to look at it. But I fell into it really nicely, had a ton of fun with it, and certain abilities and spells in the game I had fun with, even if I got them very early in the game, all the way to the end. I enjoyed the hell out of them, particularly a spell called Ignition, where you could pick up enemies and drag them with you and smash them into a wall, and you could steer it. So lining people up, getting them into a certain position, and then smashing through them. I had fun pressing that button every single way of the game. Not to say it was perfect, though. I was really, really surprised that towards the end of the game, you gain a new set of abilities that completely change how the combat works in the game. And this is where I will definitely bang heads with people who, like, love the fact that this does massive amounts of damage. Like, it's by far, like, some of these spells are by far and away better choices for doing DPS. But they're dull. Especially because they quite literally take control of your character away from you. And this spell might last 7 to 8 seconds, which is a long time in an action game, where you can put the controller down, you can have a drink, and your character will just eradicate things on screen. As simple as that. You'll press one button combination, just press it, and off your character goes. And the fact they introduced this really late in the game especially was baffling to me, because it really took away from the strength and power that you'd built up over the rest of the game to kind of focus you into one particular area that was hugely effective. And that's where it gets dangerous, because most gamers will take what is known as the path of least resistance. If this ability just eradicates stuff, I'm going to use that ability. And I actively upset some people by trying it for maybe 15, 20 minutes and then being like, I can't play this. Like, this is not fun for me. I don't like the fact that, yes, it looks spectacular, it looks gorgeous, but it's boring. It's really boring. I'm just channeling a spell that literally doesn't even have me having the controller in my hands and winning the game. That's not fun for me in any way, shape, or form. I'm moving away from it. And I did see quite a number of people who are along for this ride. It's like, I've never seen anybody spec out of this ability before. But yeah, like, it was too damn much. It was far too damn much. Continue with some other things then. So what are the issues that I found with it not being like a perfect game? This isn't to do with it being an FF game, being a perfect game. The pacing is really all over the place. And I think that is a result, like we talked about in video 2, of the main focus being the story. Like the central main story, the MSQ, that was the main focus. And then they fleshed out stuff afterwards. And sometimes they ended up with just far too much. Typically, and this is where it'll get a little convoluted for some old school FF players, you're very aware in the main story of when you're about to do the final mission. Like, they make it abundantly clear this is about to be the last mission. This is the end of the game. You've reached it. Once you click this button, there's no going back. This is it. You're going for it. That is very standard in Final Fantasy games. It happens to me a lot. If it's 8, there's a giant thing that appears. That's where the end of the game is. Similar with 7. Similar with 10. You know when you go to this place, it's the end. It's over. But the difference is this. Traditionally, in Final Fantasy games, when that happens, you have a choice to make as a player. Do you go ahead and finish the story? Sure. Or do you wait and go and do things that you found earlier in the game that are unresolved? Now, these aren't quests or anything like that. These are just things that you found, particularly when the game was more open world, that you should probably go and take a look at because you haven't been there yet. Was there a building that you couldn't do anything with because you were too low level when you found it? Was there some environmental situation like the ground rumbling or something, a warning about some ocean, something like that, where you were like, okay, I'm going to go and do all this stuff before I do that because I'm interested in it. There's a mystery to be solved. I care about this. That I don't care about, I'm going to ignore that and go and do those things. That's a very standard thing in FF. Now, they tried to do that here because, again, they make it abundantly clear you're going into the end game. Well, then they present you with 7 hours of side quests. I'm not joking. And the difference here is they're on your map. They're in your registry. These are things that are like shining up to you to do. And they involve very, very important characters. And these stories are actually very good. In the previous video, I talked about a lot of the side quests were hit or miss. The ending ones, the 7 hours, should have probably been part of the main story because they're kind of important to the characters that you've been along with for this ride on a journey that's about to end. And you see who has these side quests and you're like, oh God, yeah, we should totally do that. It's not as easy as being like, oh, I can't figure this thing out, or I'm not bothered about that thing and I can ignore it. These things not only show up on your map, they list in, and if you've been completing the side quests up until that point, of course you want to finish them all. Well, that's a gamer mantra, as well as throwing in like new bounties to go and do. All these kind of things add up to about 7 hours of gameplay once you've done the penultimate mission to moving into the last mission. And it creates a weird pacing issue because you kind of get frustrated, or at least I did, with the fact that we're right at the end and then suddenly it's like, okay, we have all this to do. And I started treating them like MMO quests, which is how efficiently can we do this? So I'm going to talk to everybody in this hub. It reminded me more of World of Warcraft than Final Fantasy XIV, actually, is I'll talk to everyone in this hub, then I'll check the bounties to which ones are in the same zones, and then we'll efficiently knock them out, which meant you were kind of doing the side quests out of order, because you would do one part of one part of another, which might lead on to something else, because some of them are chain quests, and then maybe an hour later, you carry on with the second part of the quest you did first. Things like that, which is just a pacing issue. Again, the content of the actual side quests, in terms of the story being told, was great. It was just a lot to dump on a player as you've reached the end of the game, and they're important and you want to do them, but you end up doing them, because they're so, like, stacked, instead of being gradually increased, instead of they just dump them all over you, you're like, okay, so I kind of need to do these efficiently. What I'm not going to do is go and pick up one, go and do that, then start again, go and do that, start again, go and do that. Some players will do that. It's not how my brain works. It was definitely felt frustrating because it was like, okay, but we're also at the end. And something really important just happened in the main story. Like, something really epic just happened. I want to see the conclusion of that, but also I have to do this. So it was a pacing issue. I will say, flat out, the crafting and weapon system is one of the absolute worst I have ever seen in a video game. I'm not exaggerating there either. I've played fucking thousands of these things. Thousands of these things. And Final Fantasy XVI's crafting and just material system is abhorrently bad. Like, it's unfathomable to me that it exists the way it does. Finding massive weapons that are just instantly replaced, or just being told that you've got this mega recipe and it not being an upgrade. At one point, I got maybe 6 or 7 weapon upgrades, while the other 2 armor slots, which are braces and a necklace or something, or a ring, never got upgraded. They never got an upgrade path. I never wanted for crafting materials. I ended up with so many that I don't know why this crafting material thing existed. It's almost like it's there for speedrunners who won't pick things up or do extra content so they can just go and buy them from a vendor, because you could do that too, and just nullify this whole system entirely. Like, it kept devaluing itself all the time. It just devalued its own existence and just became a frustrating part of the game, is just having this system. And then it was like, hey, here's a mega weapon, but you're not going to get it till later. And it was like, all right, I guess. There was no excitement ever about getting new weapons. There was no excitement. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that the RPG elements in Final Fantasy XVI are really weak. It is an RPG, but it's very weak. are very light on the RPG elements. It only has 4 stats in the game. It's like HP, defense, attack, and stagger. That's it. No magic stat, no spirits, nothing along those lines where you can mix and match things and put them together. And you look at, say, Final Fantasy VIII system of the job system of mixing in the junctions, really customizing your characters. Even FF7's remake, there's a ton of character customization in there from all the weapons and all the different materia varieties, the summons that you can put with them. All that is just gone. It's not here. And it's not necessary either. So it's just removed and it's very light. And you just kind of like, okay, so this is 5 DPS upgrade and 5 HP. This is 5 defense. This one's 5 stagger. Up it goes. Number go up. Better. End of story. Is kind of what it does. So it's objectively terrible, in my opinion. I think it's absolutely goddamn awful. The mob variety is really lacking. Starts out pretty strong in the game. But certainly by the midway point, you've pretty much seen everything. You might get 1 or 2 extra enemy types that appear later, but by mid-game, you've kind of seen everything for the most part. And the reason for that is actually a calculated decision, which I think is a detriment to the game, is because the bounty system that's in the game, which is replacing the idea of super bosses, as far as I know, at least right now, there are no super bosses in this game, are just bigger versions of enemies you've already fought. And they kind of want you to know the patterns and things, or what this boss does before you get into it. And so they're just larger scale versions of the same enemies you'll find. I think there's one unique, maybe even not. I think there's one unique bounty that's not just another version of something in the game already, that's just bigger and badder, has more HP, has a couple of extra attacks. But for the most part, the mob variety got very lacking. And the reason for that, though, is you learn these fights, so you feel stronger. You'll fight something earlier in the game that kicks your ass, and by later on, you fought that thing maybe 7 or 8 dozen times, and therefore you're fine with it, even though it's a relatively tough enemy. And you do end up sort of mashing through the enemies, and you do feel stronger for doing that. The quest variety is also an issue, in my opinion, particularly in the side quests. Every side quest works the same way. The story will be different. Some of it is very engaging, but because the game is an action game, inevitably, every single side quest ends with you killing a pack of enemies, and then later on in the game, killing a pack of enemies and probably a strong enemy. And that's it. Regardless of what you're doing, whether you're picking flowers, or going on a date, whatever it might be, or rescuing a town of ghosts, it will be the exact same gameplay loop that you go on each time. And it felt very MMO-ish to go along with that. So those things, though, are on the side. I want to be clear on that. Those are on the side to the main journey they want you to go on, which is the main story. And that is well worth playing. As miserable and as dark it is, it's an experience to go on, and I very much encourage people to do that. These things that I'm talking about, like a couple of pacing issues and the crafting system, will be forgotten about very quickly. Like, after you finish, you'll be like, that'll be the least thing in your mind. But while you're playing, it's a definite thing that's noticeably a problem. With this game that's been just tacked on, or not enough time has been spent on it, or it hasn't been planned out properly. Something like that. It feels like it needed a lot more testing, because it's hard to imagine people testing this game weren't like, I don't understand this weapon system. Why do you keep giving me these mega weapons and then immediately replacing them before I've swung them or even used them, or they're replaced in the next quest? That makes no sense to me. Why do these things just stop getting upgrades for ages? And that also goes with the accessories, which are complete stat sticks. It's either cooldown reduction on an ability or slight damage bonus to that ability. So all you're doing there is, well, what is my favorite ability? I'll buff that one. End of decision. Really. That is the end of the thought process that goes into it. Do not expect with Final... I guess all I'm saying here is do not expect with Final Fantasy 16 to be encountering a very difficult challenge and then really digging down into your abilities and figuring things out. Maybe that'll happen at some point in New Game Plus, but by then most people will have drifted out for sure. My overall point of view, yes, great game. Right, is it a good Final Fantasy game? Because I obviously have a tier list. Now, I know on the YouTube channel we haven't started our main series. That we're waiting to get back into our office because they're going to be bigger videos that we can't really do here. And my personal choice is I want to wait till we have our full filming capabilities back before we start doing the breakdowns. So Final Fantasy 16 will reappear there in a more solid and full format. But is it a good FF? Where would I rank it amongst the rest I've played? I understand that the purpose of Final Fantasy 16 is to bring in a new audience. Final Fantasy has been around for a very, very long time. And a lot of people have their favorite Final Fantasy. And I see these discussions and wars break out all the time about which one's superior, which one is better. Final Fantasy 7's great. Final Fantasy 4's amazing. Final Fantasy 6 is the best. 8's fantastic. Blah, 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 blah. 10 is better than 9. And they get into these really, the really solid hardcore fan base gets into these arguments all the time. That's not my perspective, because I came in fresh. But where would I rank it among the Final Fantasies? Final Fantasy 16 lacks a lot of things that I like about Final Fantasy, and kind of came to expect. Now, I don't want to be that guy's like, not my Final Fantasy. That's not what I'm saying. Final Fantasy changes every single game, and if you start playing them like with fresh eyes, you see that. They try something new and weird every single Final Fantasy. They always do that. They shake it up and they're like, okay, what if this happened though? And sometimes it's a slow increase, and then sometimes it's a really dramatic increase in the kind of changes that they occur and the changes that they implement into those games. Some of the games change really quickly. 7 to 6 is a massive leap. 8 to 7 is really different. And you have all these different ideas of how should limit breaks work. Let's change it completely into something that randomly procs. Like in 9, and you're like, what the hell? Why would I want this to happen? Okay, let's change that again to something else in 10, and let's also change how they control the characters. And then we reach to 7, which is much more action-paced and much more linear, going from that open world. A lot of people are like, there's always an airship in Final Fantasy. No, there isn't. There simply isn't. Right? In one game, somebody will be holding up a building hilariously, and then in another one, that's an android robot, the soul is dying, and it's more Blade Runner-ish. They go all over the place with it. But for me, though, yeah, Final Fantasy 16 lacks a lot of things that I enjoy about Final Fantasy, namely the whimsy. That might be a word not a lot of people are familiar with, but the kind of very lighthearted, silly things that I come to expect in every Final Fantasy game at some point. I might be playing the most edgy, emo character in someone like Squall from Final Fantasy VIII, who says the most ridiculous things, but then again, I might fight a T-Rex out in a little area, or I will have a constant run-in with somebody who refuses to sell me hot dogs. All right, 1 hot dog.
We are not open yet.
What the fuck is the point in a school cafeteria that isn't open for breakfast? Silly things like that. There might be the end of the world happening, but we've got time for a game of Triple Triad if you want to get down with it. And those things will happen to me all the time. In 7, yeah, I might end up joining sides with a big inflatable cat, while also riding the gold saucer with a man in his underwear. And the same in the remake. And the same in 9. We'll do a theatre production, which happens in several things. Yeah, we'll have all these really nightmarish world-ending events happening, but there's always time for a theatre production, surely, where we can pretend to act as a king and get our lines right and all that. That whimsy, that moment of seeing like a Tombury appear and me shit my pants completely because of how ludicrously small and nasty they are. Oh my god!
We got
Yes!
company.
Jack!
Can't be. I'm not even mad. I'm not even mad. Not even close to mad. Getting Tomburied? All that kind of really obscure stuff is something I missed a great deal in 16. I did. I missed it, and I think that's what gave a lot of the Final Fantasy's character. Now, I imagine, again, this is aimed to bring in a new audience, that a lot of the new players who've never played a Final Fantasy game, especially younger gamers, won't get it. And it'll probably seem cringe to them. It'll seem really, really odd and stupid to them that this would happen while all this is going on, especially if they're used to much more serious action-paced games, which we have a hell of a lot of these days, right? We have a ton of those games. This is not The Witcher, which even had moments of levity in that. This is Final Fantasy. But as somebody who's played the other ones, yeah, I missed those things. Undeniably, I was like, God, man, I don't think we're going to be going to Fort Condor here. I don't think we're going to bump into the gold saucer. I don't think somebody's going to be running around in just their underwear asking me to oil them up so they can sprint at super speed and punch a mountain or whatever it might be. Those things are all missing from 16, along with other stuff like materia and all those kinds of exciting things. Those things are gone. And yeah, I miss them. I miss them a lot. So as I would rate this in terms of my like FF comparisons, it would be lower down the list. That's the truth of it, because it does lack for me a lot of that character building, a lot of that character that I have come to expect from the FF series. And it's not here. It does have the... If this was renamed to Metal Gear Rising 2 and the character names were different and the icons in the game weren't called like Ifrit and Odin, but they were called Metal Gear Ray or whatever, I wouldn't care. It'd still be a great game. It would be fantastic. I would still enjoy the hell out of it like I did and why I think it's a good game. But it's not that. It's Final Fantasy 16. And I haven't played 15 yet. But for me, I was like, yeah, it's just missing some of that stuff. Like, yeah, we get a chocobo. But it's an uplifting story, but it has some darkness to it as well. And it just has a little hint of the music when you get on the chocobo. But it's a linear game, so the world exploration, it just kind of is a minor speed increase rather than something I can go exploring with, because the maps aren't really designed to be explored and actually actively discourage you from doing that, because the rewards aren't worthwhile. You can race across a hill and fight a couple of packs of enemies, but you're going to find 2 gil at the end of it. So getting those things are not even necessary. I'm pretty sure getting the chocobo is a side quest. It's not even part of the main story. And it's one of those things where you're like, yeah, I just missed that silliness. I did. I missed it. It was as somebody who loves dark stories, I need it to be paced well so it can hit me harder. And it didn't. It turned to comedy at the end. And that's what I missed, was that moments of going on a date with Aerith on a roller coaster and not being able to hear her properly and saying the wrong things, all those kind of stuff. And as much as I hated certain characters, like having them pop up and just be annoying and do their annoying stuff, but those are characters I can actively dislike. I can kick them out the party, do all that kind of stuff, and this has no party control. So in that respect, I wouldn't rate it as one of the highest Final Fantasy games I've ever played, although it's a game I would absolutely recommend people play as a great game on its own. And I'll be very interested to see what they take from this and move into Final Fantasy 17. That's what I'm going to be curious about. But I want to finish on this. I think this game will be remembered very, very fondly in 12 months' time, even by FF fans. I think it'll be looked back on and people will forget about the pacing issues. They will forget about the crafting system, and they will look at the main overarching story that went on in Final Fantasy 16, and they'll probably look back on it fondly, and I know I will. But I would also recommend to those people, if this is your first Final Fantasy game, there is a lot of other ones out there, but they're very different. And maybe this will give a slight misrepresentation because of FF16's serious level, but the other ones have that level of seriousness. You know, you will be dropping things on 50,000 people, but at the same time, you'll do some really stupid stuff along the way, and that's what I missed. I missed that. Overall, that's my thoughts on it. I'd love to see your reactions to it, guys. And I want to do a proper story breakdown because, as I said, the main story is very, very good. Very, very good. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you again. Bye-bye.